Video's live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the regular board meeting for February 23rd, 2022. And I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. And with that, I'd also like to acknowledge that today is Pink Shirt Day. There's many of us on the screen today in our pink shirts. I appreciate that. I think it's a wonderful thing, and it's something to be acknowledged not only once a year, but every day of the year. So thank you for the board members that have acknowledged that, and staff as well. And we turn for an approval of the agenda. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no additions to the agenda. Just to note that the two recommendations from this morning's Committee of the Whole have been uploaded to the agenda system.
Thank you so much. So an approval of the agenda, as noted, moved, second. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is the adoption of the regular board meeting minutes of February 9th, 2022.
Moved, second. All in favor? Opposed, if any? I'd also like to acknowledge that today, I'm sorry that we do have alternate directors with us. We have alternate director, alternate director McNeil and alternate director Sandhu. Welcomes. Go ahead, Ms. Legault.
No business arising from the minutes. Public input period. We have no electronic participation, but we do have folks in the gallery, so I'm just going to take a moment to see if anyone has public input from the gallery. Seeing none, we will move on to, and no delegations, to the report of the chair.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Legault. I just wanted to, I had Mr. Norman Radcliffe deliver me some peas. And he also has been delivered, just to acknowledge upcycling. So he was trying to make a point. Mr. Radcliffe is from Duncan. So he delivered these to the boardroom, and I just wanted to make note. He's trying to encourage us all to make sure that we upcycle these types of materials and what can be done with them. So that was just a little thing I wanted to share. It was very special. And then I'd like to yield the floor to Director Kuhn. Wanted to mention something. Director Kuhn?
You caught me off guard. I was going to do that later, but that's okay. I can do it now.
Yeah.
I quite often take a walk down in Cowichan Bay, and the other day I was walking down there on that industrial road, and an older couple with a Tesla parked their car and got out with their plastic bags, and they started to collect every little bit of garbage along that road. And so I went up to them and I said, I just want to thank you. I said, this is fantastic what you're doing there. And the lady said, well, we have an agenda, we have a routine. We first go to this road and clean it up, and then we'll go to Crofton and clean up there. And I was baffled. I said, well, this is great. Thank you so much. Anyway, what was I left with? I was left with a thought that this changed my whole impression of Tesla drivers. So that's all I can say.
Okay.
and Aaron, I'm not sucking up, so.
Thank you so much. And it's always important. I have noticed for years, I have been picking up garbage everywhere I go, but now I've noticed that the public and local residents are all doing it themselves. So it's very good to see. It's a shame that we have to do it, but it's great that they're taking pride in their own communities. And with that, I yield the floor to Director Acton. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to publicly apologize to Director Wilson for mentioning his name in the workshop on February 3rd when he wasn't there. And I would also like to apologize to the people in Cobble Hill. I should not have commented on Cobble Hill and compared our services issues as the same. If by chance anyone from Cobble Hill was offended, I am truly sorry. It was wrong to do so.
Thank you so much. And thank you. And we turn now to Ms. Legault.
Madam Chair, if I could, please.
We're just going to move on with this now, Director Wilson.
If I could just acknowledge the apology and say thank you very much to Director Acton, please. Thank you very much for that, Director Acton.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Good move.
Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On to item IN1 is a letter from the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority providing notice of planning of potential changes to vessel traffic management in the Port of Vancouver, and this item is for information.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director Stone.
I know that for all of us in the coastal communities of Cowichan, this is a really ever-present concern, especially over the last few years as we've had vessel parking in our sensitive environmental areas of the Salish Sea within the Southern Gulf Islands. I wonder if it would be appropriate in reading the letter that we invite the Port Authority to come speak to our board, whether it be at a meeting as a delegation or perhaps even better in some kind of a workshop format where we can gather and express the concerns of our residents, because I think there are a lot of opportunities to solve these issues without damaging sensitive ecosystems. I think, I grew up here. I remember we had a telescope set up in the window so that we could look at the ships in the harbor. And somehow in the intervening years that declined somewhat, but of course it's back with a vengeance, if you will. I'm not against transport and the necessity to be able to facilitate trade, but I think coastal communities, and especially around Vancouver Island, we have a real opportunity to give meaningful input that could really change their decision-making processes. So I don't know if it would be appropriate, Madam Chair, but to move that we write a letter to the Port of Vancouver, inviting them either via delegation or workshop to come speak with our board about the concerns that we have and the opportunities we feel that can be presented for a more sustainable solution to the vessel traffic within the Southern Gulf Islands.
Thank you so much. So that, Ms. Legault, a resolution is needed for that. I have some seconders on that. Okay, that's any discussion. I turn to Director Marsh, Sebring, and then Smith. Go ahead, Director Marsh.
First of all, I love the way we started our meeting, and I wanted to thank Director Stone for bringing this forward. I have some concerns as well for Roberts Bank, and I have some questions, so I hope that we will support this. And again, it was a beautiful way to start a meeting.
Thank you.
That's talking to you too, Director Kuhn.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was really gratified to see this letter on our agenda. Some of you will know that the last face-to-face FCM meeting we had was in 2019 in Quebec City, and I was there and I managed to buttonhole the president of the Vancouver Port Authority and have quite an extensive discussion about this parked freighter vessel issue then, and I was promised that there would be action and consultation coming. It's a little frustrating that it took 3 years, but here we are. I just want to acknowledge that they have followed through. I'm not taking credit for this letter or anything like that, but there's been a lot. All of this really to say there's been a lot of work put in on this file. I also want to acknowledge our Member of Parliament. Alistair's done yeoman work on trying to get federal attention on this, and I'm just hoping that we get some good outcomes from the consultation and also from the motion that Director Stone made. I really support this, and I'd like to see it move forward. Thank you.
And thank you also, Director Sebring, for bringing this back, because it was on our information and reminding me as well. And we do have the Cowichan Bay Ship Watch that have worked really hard, a residents association in Cowichan Bay that's worked really hard with Alistair on this. And with that, I turn to Director Smith. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would also like to include Islands Trust if there is an opportunity for a delegation to come or a workshop. I think that, Electoral Area G has 9 Gulf Islands that are also impacted, and I think Islands Trust should also be included. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I turn to Director Toporowski. Is there any chance there could be any of your members that would like to attend as well? An invite.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just waiting to for everybody to do their things, but input. I'm thinking of Larry George. That would be able to send the invite, and then he would direct the traffic internally if he's not the person to go to this meeting.
Sure. And we'll see if we get a response for that workshop or the invite at all. Director Sebring.
Yeah, it's a point of process as much as anything. Do we need to amend the motion then to extend those invites to staff at Cowichan Tribes and the Islands Trust? And further, all due respect to Director Smith, I wouldn't be in support of inviting Islands Trust to our meeting. They're a governance body on their own. I'm sure they got a copy of this letter. And if they want to have a discussion with the Port Authority, I think it's incumbent upon them to do what we're doing. It gives them a better opportunity to have input, more focused for them, and the Port Authority here with greater volume, if I can put it that way, the input from the folks on the coastal communities. If we just sort of blend them into our meeting, I fear that their message may be somewhat diffused. I think it'd be better if they arrange their own if they want to do that. That would be my perspective. But my first question, I guess, is to Ms. Legault. Given the motion that's here, do we need to amend the motion to extend the invitation to the other organizations that have been mentioned here?
Ms. Legault, do we have to amend or can we just add that on?
I think if the intent is to invite another group, you probably want to include it in the resolution, particularly if they come as a delegation, because we wouldn't typically invite other organizations to participate in a dialogue at a committee meeting. A workshop format is a little bit different, but it also helps us with tracking so nothing gets lost in the cracks.
Okay, so I turn to Director Smith and then Director Marsh.
If we're going to include other groups, then we'll need to include the Penelakut and the Liaxin. If we move towards one area, then we need to include some of the other ones, maybe the Stamanas.
Okay, I'll let Director Stone, you have a comment on that?
Well, I was just going to say the same thing. If we're going to invite one of the area nations to participate, the others should be invited as well. I wonder if it might be more appropriate to send a letter and just saying, perhaps the nations here, speaking to Mr. or Director Sebring's point, be engaged at their own government to government level with this process as well. But, that's decision of the board. I think it might get too large and yeah.
Okay, turn to Director Marsh.
Yeah, thank you. I think Director Smith made a very wise suggestion, because if you look at Area G, it's 29,469 hectares, and we all know Saltaire is quite a bit smaller. She is the area director for the regional district for the Gulf Islands, and if she feels it's important that somebody that's representing them, because there's these twin governing pieces, as she mentioned, with Islands Trust, I think we should respect that. So maybe they would just be observers, or maybe we have a workshop, but I think we can trust the director to know what's important, and also be respectful of the time that all of us I'm looking at 2 of them right now. If we got them coming to this region, let's get it all covered off so that we're not waiting for some action. That's my thought.
Okay, thank you. Director Toporowski, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't waving my hand or anything, but you must
Okay.
be reading my mind today. But I did want to add, maybe it would be wise to send it to the Cowichan Nation Alliance because it's the whole group, and then I think Snuneymuxw is not part of that, so the separate letter to Snuneymuxw territory.
Oh, so what I'm hearing from Ms. Legault is that we need an amendment to our resolution for that. Okay, so the amendment would read, Ms. Director Smith, you wanted Islands Trust and the what is the name, Director Toporowski? Or Larry George, the name of the committee?
Cowichan Nation Alliance.
Cowichan Nation Alliance, and I don't know if Stamanis is also on there too.
No, it's
I
not.
don't know.
No.
Okay, it's not. So I turn to committee if they want that as an amendment. Someone needs to move that. It's been moved. Second. Any discussion on the amendment? Go ahead, Director Sebring.
Yeah, I'm going to speak against the amendment. I think the preferred process has been brought up. I wouldn't have any objection to a subsequent motion. In fact, I would make it myself, that we apprise the Cowichan Nation Alliance and maybe even send a letter to the Islands Trust just to make sure that they got this letter and to flag it for them so that they can set up their own meetings. That would be my position. Thank you.
Okay, Director Salmon, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, should we add the Malahat into this as well, since they're on the Santa Chinla? There's not a problem with the anchorage right now, but I think it would be good protocol to put them in if we're putting the other First Nations in.
I've just checked with Director Toporowski. Are they part of the Cowichan Nations Alliance?
No, they're not.
Okay, so separate would have to be the Malahat and Chemainus.
I would consider that a friendly amendment, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'm not seeing. Go ahead, Director Martman, on the amendment.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not in favor of this amendment, and the reason it is that I think from a process perspective that we're making offers to other, I think, autonomous governments that will do the things that they want to do. I think they should be aware that we're doing this, but I don't think they necessarily to invite to us. That'd be my perspective. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Marsh.
I'd like to follow Director Toporowski if I could, Madam Chair.
Did you have your hand up again? Oh, go ahead, Director Toporowski.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Marsh, or Director Marsh, sorry. I forget which meeting I'm at. Yeah, I really think, I know that they have a different process internally for the Cowichan Nation Alliance and whatnot, but I think including them in this process is a really good idea, and letting them know that we're having this meeting, whichever way, however you write the letter. They've probably did receive maybe the same letter, but I think it's really good to be moving towards reconciliation and inclusion in our community. I think this is really good because we've had this fight within our territory of ships and anchorages and all of these different concerns that we've had. And I think the more voices and ideas at the table to be able to move forward is good. And again, they can decide if they want to be involved or not, or do their own thing. So just my input. Thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Legault, we have now on the floor the amendment, and we vote on the amendment. Was the first resolution was moved and seconded, the original one? Okay, thank you. So I'm going to vote on the amendment, and that amendment is, Ms. Legault, that the Cowichan, go ahead, see if you've got what I've got.
Islands Trust, Cowichan Nation Alliance, Malahat, Chemainus Nations be invited to participate in the meeting.
Okay. Director
So,
Stone.
point of clarification, should be Stamanis, not Chemainus. Thank you.
Stamanis. Sorry, I didn't know if I had it correct. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And so now the original motion as amended. Is there any more discussion on that? Seeing we've had a fulsome discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Director Kuhn opposes. Motion's carried. With that, we turn to the committee and commission reports. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item CR1 is the report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of February 16th.
Director Salmon, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll do these in two lumps if there are none to be pulled. First, I would move items 1 through 6, please.
That's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Go ahead, Director Salmon.
Thank you. So these last 6 are for electoral area directors only. I'd move items 7 through 12, please.
Okay, was any of this to be pulled, Director Acton? Sorry, go ahead, please.
Sorry, thank you. I wanted to pull number 10.
Okay, so we will move 7, 8. Sorry, is there another one to be pulled?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to pull number 10 and move the rest. So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Go ahead, Director Acton, on number 10.
Yeah, so I just took another look at number 10, the bylaw 4379, and I was hoping that we could agree on sending it back to EASC to have a better understanding of the consequences of this bylaw, and perhaps we should be looking at it along with the zoning bylaw so that we have a real clear picture on this. I think it's something that's really important. So if someone would second my referral motion back to EASC, that would be appreciated.
It's been seconded. So any more discussion on a referral where there is? So I'm going to call the question on a referral. All in favor? Opposed, if any? This is electoral directors only. Sorry. I'm going to do that again. This is electoral area directors only. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Thank you. CR2, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. CR2 is the report and recommendations of this morning's Committee of the Whole meeting.
I'd like to turn to Director Sebring. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Committee of the Whole met earlier today and recommends the following. First, that a grant application in the amount of $130,000 be submitted to UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund initiative for the purchase of a mobile emergency operations center. And secondly, that a 5-year partnership agreement between the Cowichan Valley Regional District, the Regional District of Nanaimo, and the City of Nanaimo for the purposes of 911 service delivery be approved. I'll move.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Turning now to staff reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item SR1 is a staff report from Legislative Services on an alternative approval process for park disposal and exchange. And the proposed resolution is 1, that the deadline for receiving elector responses for the alternative approval process for adoption of CVRD Bylaw 4413, Parkland Sutherland Park Trail Disposal and Exchange Bylaw 2022 be set at 4:30 May 12th. That elector response form be established as presented in Attachment B to the staff report. And 3, that the total number of electors of the area to which the AAP applies, which is the Electoral Area D Community Park Service Area, be determined to be 3,544 with a 10% threshold of 354.
I look to committee for been moved. Second. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Thank you. CSR2. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. SR2 is a staff report from the General Manager of Communities or Corporate Services, a verbal report regarding management strategies for project budgets. And Ms. Mohan.
Welcome, Ms. Mohan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is everybody okay if I share screen for my presentation?
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. Let's see if I can do it. Oh, I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Hold on a second. Let's go to the other side. Sorry.
That's okay. We're all pretty much adverse to anything happening while we're on these electronic contraptions.
Okay, let me try this again.
There we go.
All right. It's not quite the format I'm looking at, but it will work. So, at our last senior management team meeting last week, we had an opportunity to review procurement for the CVRD, and there was an interesting discussion around some of the recent impacts to the project environment for CVRD projects, and it was sort of unanimously agreed that we should be informing the board of some of these developments prior to budget deliberations. So that's what this presentation is meant to do. So some of the things that we're experiencing in the procurement world right now are that bids for projects that are out for RFP are coming in at between 50 and 80% over what was estimated for the job. And an example of this for the boards, if the board can recollect, is that we had to come back to the board recently for an increase to the budget for the pickleball courts that were part of a grant-funded project out at Kerry Park. And so this is starting to become not the exception, but rather the rule. And in some cases, the projects are actually coming in at triple the estimated cost. So it's really quite striking. And some of the reasons for this are that we are in an economic environment where prices are unstable. A lot of that has to do with the cost of fuel, but particularly the cost of freight, and to the point where people who are bidding on projects won't even quote on freight because they cannot guarantee that by the time the project goes ahead that freight costs will be as estimated. So they're reserving their freight related costs for future and not actually bidding with freight. We're having trouble with estimators that generally when we use professional estimators for our different engineering and construction projects, they're coming back and saying that the price guarantees on their estimates are only valid for about 2 weeks, which is really, if you think of a procurement process taking several months before a bid is awarded, 2 weeks isn't really much of a valid estimate on prices. So. We're also finding that the availability of consultants and contractors is very limited. So the marketplace is, there's a lot of work going on and not a lot of people available to do the work. And so costs are being driven up, and sometimes we can't even find someone to do the consulting or contracting work that we're bidding, or that we're seeking. And so this all comes down to the fact that it's clear to management staff that any projects that will be undertaken in 2022 are likely to happen at a significant premium based on what we're experiencing, and a premium over and above what was planned or budgeted for the project. So there's some things that management can do in response to this environment. I mentioned at the beginning that this discussion came about as a result of revisions to the procurement policy. So the procurement policy is under review. We're trying to shorten timelines in that policy and streamline administration. And this is in aid of allowing staff to make decisions on purchases that don't involve such a lengthy process of procurement, and all within the limits of the regulations and different trade treaties that we have to follow in procurement. So that is a policy that will be coming forward to the board for review at some point in the spring. So we talked about creating a roster of pre-qualified estimators and consultants so that at that stage of the project, when we go out to find an estimator or a consultant, that we have some pre-qualified choices, which should shorten up our timelines. We may end up recommending certain projects over others based on their risk profile or their urgency. We definitely will be looking at reserves where we have them to accommodate the increased costs of projects. And we may also come to the board for budget amendments if we need to. A lot of the projects that we do are based on grant funding, and in fact, the environment we find ourselves in is likely an indirect consequence of there being so much grant funding in the marketplace right now from different levels of government, especially in response to COVID, that the demand for services and goods and services and construction is just through the roof because of all of this grant money that's available. So one of the things that we will be doing when we can is requesting deadline extensions on grants. And so we're actually finding that some of the grants that responses that we're getting have already incorporated an extension to grant use of funds deadlines without even having to ask. So we do anticipate more of that activity, and we will be keeping that front of mind when we have projects associated with grants. We may have to reduce the scope of a project or extend the timeline of a project, or put project proposals together that involve optional pricing, so different aspects of the project being priced separately so that we can have more control and flexibility over the cost of a project. We may recommend deferral of a project to a future year. And one of the other things that we're considering is a revision to the way we do capital budgets. And so I think this came up in our morning discussion that based on the budget timeline that we currently follow, it's really difficult to get going on capital projects if the budget's not approved until the end of the first quarter of the year. We're already behind in the marketplace competitively, and even just seasonally and with weather, we're behind in our ability to get certain projects done during the peak construction season, especially in parks. So we are looking at how to implement multi-year capital budget procedures and looking at what timeline would be needed if we were to do that. Or if we can only do a single year budget procedure, maybe we can approve the capital budget earlier in the process so that we can at least get going on capital projects earlier in the year. So there is a role for the board in all of this. I did mention that the purchasing policy is being reviewed, and it will probably be brought forward in the spring for the board to take a look at. We may be coming to the board with priority recommendations around which projects are highest risk or highest urgency and asking for board input on those. We want the board to be aware that there may be greater use of reserves this year. You may be asked to consider changing the scope of a project or the timelines of a project, or deferring a project to a future year if costs become prohibitive. And expect that any projects that do go ahead this year will likely come in above the budget estimate that you're looking at tomorrow and the next day when you are finalizing your budget review. So that's my presentation. It's just brief, and I'll try to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you, Ms. Mohan. If you put your screen down, then I'll look to the committee, to the board, if they would have any questions. And I see Director Salmon, then Director Smith. Go ahead, please, and then Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. Two quick questions. One, Barb, what is optional pricing? That was in your last slide. What's that about?
I'm not 100% sure. I believe optional pricing is sort of if we put out a bid for proposal and there's criteria in the proposal for the project, that some of the project criteria is optional as opposed to being required. It may also relate to other flexibility in the pricing that comes back from people who bid on the project, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, and to follow up.
Go ahead, please.
I see Mr. Elzinga popped up.
Go ahead, Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Director Salmon and to assist Barb. This was something I talked about in terms of the pickleball court project at Kerry Park. So not only is there courts there, but we're talking about a washroom building, a trail, parking lots, and those are all options on the project. So could you tender the entire project with those options included, or could you ask for some optional prices on those other amenities? That was the intent of that discussion.
Thank you. So,
thanks, John.
So my follow-up was just about the grant deadlines for, is there any word on the community works deadlines? Is that likely to be extended for spending on those?
Ms. Mohan?
So, through the chair to Director Salmon, there's no official word. No, we're still we're still operating with the sort of the deadlines that have been given to us. That being said, there have been lots of conversations among staff about the political reality of having almost all local governments, in receipt of that funding, struggling to actually use it by the deadline, and that would be the impacts of not allowing a deadline on that kind of funding would be huge across the nation. So I think that it's likely that there will be something, but there's nothing official at this time. So.
Thank you.
I turn to Director Smith. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. In the 2021 budget, quite a few projects were given direction and authorization, and they didn't occur in 2021. And now they're rolling into 2022. And the funding was put in place during 2021's budget. Now we're going to find ourselves in an awkward spot because of the projects that weren't done in 2021. And I'm not really sure why some of the projects weren't done in 2021, but here we are in 2022. And so you put away the money in 2021 to be used. And now you're saying it could come back with an increased cost of half or 80% more. So that really puts us into an awkward spot. And then what becomes priority? There's things like, then there'll be a list coming forward to us with the priorities of possible projects before we go into budget tomorrow. Is that a possibility?
Ms. Mohan.
So through the chair to Director Smith, so at this time we don't have a list assembled of what projects we might recommend over others, because we're just starting in on the year, and we're just noticing some of the procurements that we put out to tender in the fourth quarter of last year. We're seeing them come back at higher prices. So again, because some of those were coming in 2021, and we needed to get going on them, we brought them to the board. We brought those individual projects to the board and said, this project has come in over what we estimated, and in order to go ahead, we need permission to increase the project budget. So some projects coming forward in 2022, we won't need to do that. We will just be able to use reserves. We may come to the board and ask for reserves, but we may not ask for a budget amendment. I think that what the presentation is meant to do is just put you on notice that what you see in the budget may not actually roll out during 2022 the way we had estimated, because the budget estimates were done already 6 months ago, probably, and the marketplace has changed considerably. So the best that we can really do is bring them to your attention when they happen. If we have competing projects and we can at the same time, and we can bring them together in a list and recommend priorities, we will do that. But it will really depend on a case-by-case basis what the bid results are for the projects that we put out to tender. So,
Ms. Weiner, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add through the chair to Director Smith, with regards to those 2021 projects, when staff is doing the 2022 budget, they always review the budget for those projects. And if they feel like the estimates at that time, it's not exactly the time as Ms. Mohan says, we're finding that there's higher, but at that time, if they required an increase, they did an additional supplemental to say it's been updated and that information was forwarded. So some projects you'll see there was an additional amount put in for the budget for the 2022 consideration. So there was a process to sort of update them to what they thought was their best guess for 2022. So it's not, you're still at the 2021 numbers.
Okay, follow up, Director Smith. Okay, I turn to Director Wilson, then Marsh, then Morrison. Director Wilson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is quite normal from what I've seen, and just in normal sort of household stuff that I've been trying to get, bids, even if you can get them 50 to 80% over extreme premiums and all the rest of it. So I know that there are a lot of projects at the moment which have been affected by this, one of which, of course, or quite a few of them have already got grant funding. But that grant funding now will require 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much as what originally needed anyway. So what do we do with that? I understand that we've got the grant extensions, but at the same time, you can extend for another 2 years, by which time the cost of doing this may be triple. Or what do we do now? Do we just give the money back? Do we put it on hold? We can't just keep saying we're going to do it, and it's going to cost more, because we've all seen the headlines, inflation, everything else. We can't keep hitting the taxpayers with more and more tax rises for stuff which we'd like to do. We need to get this under control as quickly as possible. That's not a question. So my next question would be, there is something there about a roster of pre-qualified estimators and consultants. What does that actually mean? Because I'm not a great fan of this kind of thing, because we then become very low priority if they're already pre-qualified. Are we high on their list of priorities?
Go ahead, Ms. Mohan. I just wanted to say that the Kerry Park pickleball is a perfect example of what we had to do to adjust for one. But go ahead, Ms. Mohan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Director Wilson. So the roster is on our end, so that we would, rather than going out individually every time for an estimator on a project, that we would pre-qualify for the year a number of estimators who then we could then go and use without having to go through a procurement process for the estimator.
Okay, so it's a list. It's an internal list that
It's
we've
an internal
got,
list,
and okay, fine, thank you.
Follow up, Director Wilson. Okay, I turn to Director Marsh. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the report, Ms. Mohan. And I think you said in some cases, procurement was 3 times what was originally expected or budgeted for. So I'm just wondering, given, as Ms. Mohan said, this is a problem that's facing local governments probably across the country, if the board might want to see if anyone's done any analysis on when this might correct, because it has to. I can just tell about my own daughter, who is likely going to stay in Calgary because even though she has a place in Victoria to rent, the cost of everything else up here is making her feel like, this is crazy for me to do that. I need to be saving for my future. So I believe something is going to have to happen. And I would, unless it's an emergent project, and given our staffing challenges and who knows what's going to happen with the weather, I would prefer that we just deferred for a while. But I'd like to ask if staff can work on getting, I don't know what the right word is, commitments from the grantors that, given the situation we find ourselves in, two years into a pandemic, we just had an emergency crisis. We don't know what's going to happen with those vehicles. You know, supply and demand, a challenge for young people to live in some of our cities. Could they just guarantee that when we're ready, that grant would be available? And if that's a possibility, I would suggest that we maybe put this decision, well, we are sort of putting it off because you're going to bring each one to us as the bids come in. Is that correct, Ms. Mohan? Or are you going to go ahead?
To Director Marsh, yeah, the idea here is that every situation is going to be a little bit different, and so sometimes we're going to be able to make a decision to let it go ahead using reserve funding, and other times we're going to be, having to come to you and ask you to make a decision about whether this is a priority or not. So it really is sort of going to end up being a case by case situation. But yeah. I just wanted to warn you that's what's going to happen this year, is that you're going to hear more of that than expected, because the budgeted amounts that we have are likely to change and not be sufficient. With respect to grants, grants come from a whole bunch of different avenues. They often come from different, levels of government, obviously. And I did have a conversation based on a question from Director Nicholson with our CFO about, what level of lobby or what level of cooperation is there among local governments to raise the issue of this problem at the provincial or the federal level. And so Ms. Wayner's response to me was that one of the places where that is often done is at the Government Finance Officers Association conference in the spring. And so she is, this is a topic of conversation among her colleagues, and is certainly top of mind for them. So it is a situation that we're not alone in, for sure. And so I think that there will be responses from other levels of government throughout the year. But it's just hard to say at this point what projects it might affect for us. And so this is just sort of a heads up to be aware that we're going to do our best to manage the situation, but there are going to be limitations. And when we run up against them, where appropriate, we'll be coming to you for decision making and with our recommendations.
Thank
So if I may follow up, Madam
Go
Chair?
ahead.
So I'm assuming most of these projects are in area directors' regions, correct?
Through the chair to Director Marsh, not necessarily. So I think almost every single project that's going out there right now is coming back with surprises. So it is affecting almost all of our procurements. Most of our procurements happen in engineering services. So those ones, because that's where we do most of our procurements, that's where you'll see it the most. And parks, I would think, is another one where we're seeing it. So, but it's not restricted to one kind of project. So.
Yeah, so I guess I would have difficulty after the last couple of years and with inflation on everything else that people are dealing with. I'd prefer to kind of park some of the projects if we could, potentially even if we lose some grant money, because honestly, this is just not sustainable. We're going to be shedding young families like crazy if this continues. So I don't want to make a motion. It's early in this information. So that's just where I'm leaning, and I'll see what other people have to say.
I know that each commission has been dealing with that on their own, and their recommendations has been coming to the board. So I turn to Director Morrison. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have a couple of questions here, but just, like anyone else, I had a water storage tower that we were anticipating going ahead last year, didn't. It needs to be replaced. The one that's there is in critically bad condition and $100,000 more and cost to steel. So some things can't be put on hold, though I tend to agree that it's probably not a good idea to be spending money when we're in such a hyper-inflated price environment for so much of what we do. So, I think prudence makes a lot of sense. But couple of things. I don't know that we've seen a list of what the anticipated capital projects are for the year ahead, and at least I don't recall. But I think that it's important if staff are saying they can only come to us with a, as they develop scenario and needing our input, I think I'd like to see a list of what are the possible projects that are going to be done this year, because well, we may have to make decisions one-off. They're obviously going to have a knock-on effect to the rest of the list as we go throughout the year. So I'm hoping staff can provide that in an upcoming meeting so that we can consider the ones that we will be considering later in the year. And my last question is, and this is around the estimation on my water tower project. It came back, steel's up, hard to get it. That's the cost, and we're proceeding. But are we seeing price variability from our estimators on everything in their bailiwick, like all aspects of what they're doing as far as estimating, or are we just seeing the ones that they can directly attribute to, like cost of steel or cost of transportation? They're obviously not wanting to give us guaranteed prices, and this is 180 degrees to when I was first elected, because everybody was hungry. They were guaranteeing prices for 6 months or a year because there wasn't a lot of grant money around and local governments weren't spending a lot of money. Now it's the opposite. We're trying to get projects done. We're doing replacement costs, and there seems to be a lot of money, and we can't get consistent pricing out of our estimators. So is it everything across the board is varying to a great degree, or is it just things that that are attributable to what's required in a project or in an estimate?
And Mr. Boysen has popped up, but go ahead, Ms. Mohan. I'm not sure who would like to speak to that.
I'll start, Madam Chair, if that's all right. I just wanted to respond to Director Morrison by saying that yes, we can certainly work on a list of like capital projects, but the capital projects which are new capital for the year are basically your supplementals in the budget. Right, so so it is already sort of naturally separated out by that supplemental process. So there would likely be some capital replacements which are not necessarily new capital, and maybe that's where we have to do a little bit more detail. So I will say that with respect to the estimation, I can't speak directly to it because I don't have firsthand knowledge of what's coming back, except to say that at our managers meeting, the managers were relating that the estimators themselves are super frustrated, that they're having trouble nailing down any prices to be able to do their estimation. So I imagine it's the major players that you've identified: fuel, freight, the cost of raw materials. I imagine labor is in there because throughout the world we're noticing that, you know, the first world nations are having labor shortages, et cetera. So so I don't think there's major surprises there, but that's all that I can offer at this time. But perhaps Mr. Boyson has more information to offer.
Mr. Boyson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to add specific to that, just from what I hear from some staff from our recent tenders, is that it's actually the materials that's the biggest challenge, and that's the one that's causing them the largest amount of fluctuations. That, of course, we all know the labor issues, but when it comes to their pricing, that they're finding the materials is the biggest challenge, and the fluctuations just with the supply chain and the demand for materials. It's that's where I'm hearing the greatest concerns.
Thank you. I do not have anyone else on my speakers list, and I will move now to, that was for information. I turn to SR3, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. SR3 is a staff report from Community Planning regarding a minor amendment required to the CD10 zone on amendment for Gallier Road, and this report's for information.
And is that Ms. Pressman speak to this?
Yes, I can speak to this on behalf of Mr. Tippett.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just an information report to advise the board of a revision to bylaw 4404 to amend the South Cowichan zoning bylaw 3520, the CD10 zone. So in the bylaw that received first and second reading, inadvertently there was a second subsection of the zone which references the vegetated buffer that's required. And so the revision to the bylaw is just to add to section 11.10.9 of the CD10 zone to replace 60 meters with 50 meters. And so, so yeah, this is the next item in the agenda to rescind second reading and give second and third and adoption of the bylaw. I just wanted to also mention that the public notice that was distributed did mention that the proposed buffer is going to be 50 meters.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On to bylaws for electoral area directors. We have BEA 1, and this is a motion to rescind second reading of CVRD bylaw 4404, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw CD10 2021.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Salmon. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you.
And also bylaw 4404 to be given second reading as amended and third reading.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Morrison. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you.
And finally, CVRD bylaw 4404, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw CD10 2021 for adoption.
Been moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Morrison. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you so much. Ms. Legault.
And item BEA 2, CVRD bylaw 4367, manufactured home park bylaw 2022 for first and second readings.
Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Director Smith. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are no other business items, so that brings us to question period. We don't have any requests to participate electronically, so I'll just leave it open if there is anyone in the gallery who wants to participate in question period. And seeing nothing, that would bring us to a motion to close the meeting to the public in accordance with Community Charter Section 91, I, C, and G, and sub 2D.
That's been moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Morrison. All in favor? Opposed, if any. And we have another link to this, of course. So we'll have a 10-minute break.
We're just going to stop the video.
Oh, okay.
We do have a separate meeting invitation. Just a minute.